Foxes tolerate the cold better than we do. Every time we return from the Rzhev area, at a low altitude over the snow-covered plains, we see them trudging through the snow. If we pass above them, at a height of 3 to 4 meters, they crouch down and look at us fearfully. Yekel, who still has some machine gun ammunition left, fires a line at random. He hits the target and later returns to this spot in a storch equipped with skis. However, it soon turns out that the leafy hide is completely ruined by bullet holes. I am unpleasantly surprised by the news that I have been granted a leave of absence home in gratitude for my work in providing flight support. After my leave expires, I am ordered to proceed to Graz in Styria and pass on my recent experiences to the new crews. All new solemn declarations that I do not need a vacation, that I do not want to leave the unit, bring me nothing. The order is final and not to be discussed. Lieutenant Pressler promises to claim me back the very moment I am in my new job, and I grasp the opportunity. One morning I head west in a transport plane through Vitebsk, Minsk, and Warsaw to Germany. I spend my vacation skiing in Riesensberg and the Tyrol and try to fight my rage with exercise and sunbathing. Gradually, the peaceful view of this mountain world, my home, and the beauty of its snow-covered peaks glistening in the sunshine relieves the stress of the daily combat sorties. Before I get to work training new crews, I get married. My father is still a church rector and performs the ceremony in our small village, to which I am bound by so many happy memories of a carefree childhood. Then a trip to Graz, this time as an instructor rather than a cadet. Flying in formation, diving, bombing, firing airborne weapons. I am often in my airplane 8 hours a day since I have no assistance. In bad weather or during maintenance, military exercises or sports appear on the schedule. The crews that the flight schools send to me are sent to the front after training. When they finish their training, I will meet some of them in the not-too-distant future. Maybe even in my own unit. During my rest hours, I continue my athletic training, play tennis, swim, or wander around the majestic surroundings of Graz. After 2 months, I get an assistant. Pilot Yekel from 3rd Squadron has just been awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross and seconded to our training unit. We are conducting raids on peaceful targets as if we were at the front. I have 2 Messerschmitts, so we are also able to simulate interception of Stukas by enemy fighters. The training is hard and strenuous, but I believe that the crews who endure it and do what is required of them learn a lot. Physical effort and endurance are forged by the sport. Almost every Monday morning I have a 10K run for everyone. It will only serve a good cause. In the afternoon we go to Andritz to swim and test our nerves. All of the cadets participate in pole vaulting and compete enthusiastically for the swimming category. Yekel is a few years younger than me and still quite a boy. It's impossible to be angry with him, no matter what strange situations he sometimes gets into. He is lively and full of fun, trying to live life to the fullest. On Sundays, I usually go to the mountains. There is a bus stop in front of the guardhouse, and I always get on the bus going to town here. The shadow of the bus travels along with us, and suddenly I notice from its shape that someone is riding on the roof. There's a lot of fun and fooling around, especially when some girl is walking down the street. I can guess who they are by their kepi. They're soldiers from our base. But they can't be my cadets because orders have been issued repeatedly forbidding soldiers from riding on the roofs of buses. I say to the ground service lieutenant sitting next to me, "Those guys up there must be yours." With some superiority in his voice he replies, "You'll laugh, but they're yours." When the soldiers return to Graz, I give orders for them to report to me at 11 a.m. on Monday morning. When they show up, I say, "What the devil do you think you're doing? You knew you were disobeying orders. This is unheard of." I can see in their faces that they have something to say to me, and I ask what they have to say for themselves. We only thought it was okay, since instructor Yekel was also traveling with us. I quickly dismissed them and burst out laughing. Then I imagine Yekel sitting on the roof of the bus. When I explain to him what he has gotten me into, he feigns naive surprise and I can no longer keep a stern expression on my face. In Graz, a few days later, my wife and I barely escaped an accident. The gliding club tearfully begged me to tow their glider in an ancient Czech biplane because they had no other pilot. I agreed, and besides, I decided to take the opportunity to take to the air with my wife, who loves to fly. After 2.5 hours of flying, I asked how much fuel was left because the fuel gauge wasn't working. They told me that there was enough fuel for 4 hours. I could keep flying and not worry about anything. I believed their words, and we took off again. When we were flying at low altitude over a potato field, the engine suddenly stopped. I only had time to shout, "Hold on tight," because my wife wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and the plane went down, right into the furrows. It successfully skipped over some ditch, and then froze in the middle of a cornfield. We borrowed some fuel from a local farmer. I took to the air again, and flew to the airfield, which was 3 kilometers away. How many of my comrades, especially those who served in the Luftwaffe, went through battles with the enemy without a scratch and crashed to death because of some unusually stupid civilian accident. This trivial incident reiterated the need to observe the one trite rule that we must be careful everywhere, not just at the front. Similarly, in combat, we were not allowed to take unnecessary risks, even if we had no thought for our lives. When I land again at the airfield, in an ancient biplane, I learned that the reserve of another squadron has already been transferred to Russia. In that case, it will soon be our turn. For a long time now I have been thinking about the fact that I have been at home for several months, and suddenly I realize how eager I am to get to the front. I am constantly tormented that I have been kept away from it for so long, and I feel it especially when I sense that such a long absence could be quite dangerous for me. I am only human, and my instincts tell me that I would prefer to trade a close encounter with death for an even closer relationship with life. I want to live, and the desire to live is stronger in me every day. It pounds in me like the beating of my heart as I avoid death again. But I feel it in the exhilaration of skiing down a steep alpine slope. I feel this desire with every breath, every pore of my skin, every fiber of my body. I am not afraid of death. I have often looked into its face for long seconds, and I was never the first to take my eyes off it. But every time after such an encounter I rejoiced with all my heart, and sometimes screamed in delight trying to outshout the roar of the engines. All this I think as I mechanically swallow my dinner in the dining room. And then I make a firm decision. I'm going to pull all the strings until they take me out of this rut here and send me back to the front. I don't achieve my intended goal, but soon we are ordered to fly to the Crimea. Our new base is at Cerebus, not far from Simferopol, and here in any case we are closer to the front than before. We solved the transportation problem by using our U-87s as tugs for cargo gliders. Having flown the Krakow-Lvov-Proskurov-Nikolaev route, we soon find ourselves on the spot. The airfield here is very large and suitable for training purposes. Our makeshift accommodation is not very different from what we had at the front, but where there is a desire, there is always a way out. We are resuming our regular training, the same as at Graz. We especially enjoy practicing landings at other airfields because in the morning we land, for example, in the west, on the Black Sea coast, and in the afternoon perhaps in the northeast, on the Azov coast. We bathe for at least half an hour on the magnificent beaches in the hot sunshine. There are no highlands here except for the hills near Kerch, and to the south, the Crimean Yela, a mountain range that runs along the southern coast of Crimea. The rest of the peninsula has a flat relief. It is vast steppes, in the center of which there are giant tomato plantations. The very narrow coastal strip stretching between the sea and Yela is considered the Russian Riviera. We often come here and take firewood from here by truck, because there are no forests where our base is located. The comparison with the Riviera turns out to be superficial. I see a few palm trees in Yalta, but 2 or 3 trees do not turn it into the Riviera. From a distance, the houses gleam brightly in the sun, especially when flying at low altitude along the coast. They make a remarkably favorable impression. But if you walk the streets of Yalta and see everything from a close distance, the general primitiveness and vulgarity of this Soviet resort is a great disappointment. The neighboring towns of Alupka and Alushta are little different from Yalta. My men are delighted by the many vineyards between these towns. The picking season is just beginning. We sample bunches on every slope and often come home late and with monstrous stomach lashes. After a while I get nervous about not being sent back to the front. I annoy the general commanding the Air Force in the Caucasus and offer him my Stukas as a combat unit, as I believe that most of the crews are already fit for the front. I point out that combat sorties would be great training for them, and that any regiment can consider itself lucky to get pilots who already have combat experience. We first receive orders to relocate to Kirk. It turns out that Soviet transport ships often pass by the southern coast. From here we could attack them, but it doesn't go any further than that. For hours we wait for the transports to appear, but nothing happens. One day I want to try my luck on my Messerschmitt fighter. My target is enemy reconnaissance planes. But the enemy planes immediately deviate from the course and leave towards the sea, towards Tuapse and Sukhum, and I am powerless to catch up with them, as I cannot take off until we have spotted them. Nevertheless, I soon achieve our transfer to Belorukhinskaya, near Maykop, where another air regiment is stationed. Here we will be able to gain experience in combat sorties, as we are supposed to be used to support the offensive in the direction of Tuapse. Immediately we become a frontline unit loaded with missions. We are in the air from morning to evening, flying over the area where the army is attacking in the direction of Chadyukinskaya Navichinskaya, on the way to Tuapse. It's not exactly easy for us, because in our training unit we use relatively old airplanes, and the regiment operating here, with which we fly, has the latest type of dive bomber in service. When we fly in formation at high altitude, it puts us at a disadvantage. Flying in narrow valleys is a thrilling activity. We are often careless, impelled by the desire to fight. We fly into a trap if we pursue the enemy or try too hard to discover his hiding places. If during our search we enter one of these narrow valleys, we often cannot maneuver at all. Sometimes at the end of such a valley, a mountain suddenly rises up, blocking the way forward. We have to react quickly, and again we owe our salvation only to the good performance of our airplane. But this is still child's play compared to the situation when we find ourselves in a valley, when 200 meters above us, the mountains are shrouded in thick clouds. The tops of the mountains here are at 1,200 to 1,500 meters. Everything becomes easier when we have flown the whole valley several times and know which ones have exits and behind which of the mountains we can get to an open place. But it all becomes a guessing game when we fly in bad weather or under low clouds. When we attack at low altitude some road on the valley floor, we are occasionally bombarded from above, because the mountain sides on either side of us are also occupied by the Ivans. Our few mountain troops are fighting hard against an outnumbered enemy entrenched in the mountains. We are in close contact with the ground troops and are doing our best to respond to all requests for attack and air support. Fighting in the mountain forests is especially difficult. It's like fighting blindfolded. If our operations officer gives us permission to attack certain parts of the forest, we follow his instructions, even if we cannot see the targets clearly. It is on such occasions that the army praises our usefulness and the effectiveness of our attacks. The neighboring Heimamberg Heights are in German hands. With hard fighting we are pushing forward, southwestward. Less than 20 kilometers separate our comrades from Tuapse, but the losses in these mountain battles are too high and there are practically no more reserves. The offensive is cancelled, and we do not achieve final success. The battle for the railroad station. A Soviet armored train fires heavy shells at our sparse attacking chain. This armored train fights skillfully. It spews fire and then, like a dragon, crawls away to its lair. This lair is a mountain tunnel near Tuapse. If we go up in the air, then he, seeing our approach, rushes back into the tunnel, and we only see his tail. Once we caught him, napping, unawares, or rather, almost caught him. We had already sneaked up on him, but he must have been alerted at the last minute. He took a hit, but the damage can't be serious. He was repaired a couple days later and reappears. But now, this steel monster is extremely cautious. We never see him again. Then we make the following decision. If we can't get closer to this train, we will deliver a fatal blow to its guardian angel. We block the tunnel exit with a special bomb, preventing him from coming out, and give our comrades on the ground, if only for a while, the respite they so desperately need. Give and take. That's the philosophy of life, says my flight gunner with a smirk. We also attack the port of Tuapse, which, like all ports, is heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns. The city and the harbor itself, which is behind a mountain range, are still in Soviet hands. If we are flying at an altitude of 3,000 meters, the anti-aircraft guns cover us long before we approach the target. Anti-aircraft guns are stationed in the mountains for the last few miles of our route. To avoid them, we fly at an altitude of only 800 meters toward the mountain ranges that rise perpendicularly out of the sea to an altitude of up to 1,500 meters. Our attacks are directed against docks, port equipment, and ships lying in the harbor, mostly tankers. Usually anything that can move starts circling to avoid our bombs. They do not succeed, and this proves that my crews have become real combat pilots. The fire of anti-aircraft guns over the port is not at all comparable to the defense of Kronstadt. Nevertheless, it makes a strong impression. We can't go back over mountain ranges because they are too high. We usually dive over the harbor and then gain maximum altitude, flying toward the sea, and thus quickly out of range of enemy anti-aircraft guns. However, over the sea we are already being waited for by Soviet fighters. Now we have to climb to 3,000 meters in order to return home at an altitude of at least 300 meters above the mountains, because it is easy to lose altitude during air combat. The conditions in which we attack are the same as in the Gelendzhik area, where we also occasionally engage in attacks on airfields or naval targets in the Gulf of Gelendzhik. The Russians soon discover our base at Belorukhinskaya. They bombard it day and night. Although acting with small forces and with little damage to material, they nevertheless manage to deal a serious blow to the regiment we are visiting. Their commander, Major Orthofer, is killed during one of these raids. As luck would have it, just at that moment I land and taxi into the parking lot. Bombs fall right and left. My airplane is damaged by numerous pieces of shrapnel and is out of commission, but I am not wounded. General Flugbeil, who commands all the Luftwaffe units stationed here, is often present at our formations. He brings the news that we must move further east, to an airfield on the Terek River. Another offensive has begun here, and we must support it. It's heading in the direction of Grozny to the Caspian Sea. We fly to our new base in Soldatskaya above Georgievskaya, Piatigorsk, and Mineralny Vody, from where we can already see the huge and magnificent Elbrus. We make a short landing halfway to Mineralny Vody and rest. There are plenty of mice here. There are mice in the straw mattresses, in closets and crevices in the floor, in every hole and corner. They jump out of our bags and devour everything. It's impossible to sleep. You can hear them fiddling even in the pillows. I throw at them whatever comes to hand to scare them away. For a few minutes there is silence, but then the noise starts again and is even worse than before. In Soldatskaya, we get rid of this mouse infestation. Probably the Ivans, who are constantly dropping their bombs here, are scaring them away. We don't have many anti-aircraft guns. We are not flying, as previously thought, to support the tank wedges in the east. Our first mission is in the south. A few days later, Nalchik is captured by German and Romanian troops. The panorama, as we approach our objective, is marvelous. Snowy peaks up to 5 kilometers high soar ahead, sparkling in the sun in every imaginable color. Below us are green meadows, with yellow, red, and blue spots. These spots are trees and flowers. Above us is a brilliant blue sky. As I approach my target, I often completely forget about the bombs I am carrying and my task. Everything gives such a calming, peaceful, and beautiful impression. The world of mountains, with Elbrus in the center, has such a gigantic, overpowering effect. In this valley, or that valley would fit several alpine ranges. After capturing Nalchik, we make a few more sorties east of the Terek, beyond Mozdok. Then, rather unexpectedly, comes the order to return to Belorechynskaya, in the Tuap zone, where the intense struggle for all the same key positions continues. The fighting there goes on until November. I make my 650th sortie, and for the next few weeks I feel unwell. Jaundice. I've been guessing about it for a while, but was hoping it would go away on its own and I could keep flying. The whites of my eyes have turned yellow. My skin is the same color. I deny that there is anything wrong with me and reassured General Floodbale, who has been trying for quite some time to get me into a hospital bed. Some malicious individuals claim that I ate too much whipped cream. There may be some truth in that. The general brought a case of champagne to celebrate my 600th sortie and was quite surprised when I explained that my weakness lay on another plane. A few days later, a huge cake arrived with 2 buckets of whipped cream. Getting it wasn't that big a problem, especially considering the large number of dairy cows in these parts. For 2 days, we eat practically nothing but these goodies. On the 3rd, there is hardly a single crew fit for departure. As I turn yellow as a quince, a Messerschmitt 108 arrives with orders from the general to take me, by force if necessary, to a hospital in Rostov. I managed to persuade them to land at my regiment's base in Karpovo, near Stalingrad. We fly there on a course to the north through Wilista. I move heaven and earth to stay with the regiment, and from here hand over command of my unit to someone else. It doesn't work out, but the regimental commander promises me the 1st squadron with which to start my company in Russia. But first of all, to the hospital. And in mid-November I find myself in a hospital in Rostov. This hospital stay is getting on my nerves. I have been here for a whole week, and I see almost no change in my condition, unless you count the fact that I do not regain my strength by strict diet and staying in bed. None of my coworkers are visiting me. A trip to visit me at the hospital would take them too long. Although we are near the sea, it is already getting cold. I can tell by the wind that blows into the room through the windows, which are mostly covered not by glass, but by box lids. My attending physician is a great guy, but he has already lost all patience with me and becomes stern the day he enters my room and says unceremoniously, "The day after tomorrow, there is an ambulance train to Germany. I will organize a place for you there." I'm not going. But you just have to go home for treatment. What are you thinking about? He was indignant. But you can't send me away from the front on account of such a simply ridiculous illness. This is a very good hospital, but I've been in bed enough. To leave him in no doubt that I meant exactly what I said, I tell him, I have to get back to my squadron right now. Now the doctor is truly angry. He opens his mouth, slams it shut again, and finally begins to protest vehemently. I take no responsibility. You got me. No responsibility. He is silent for a second, then adds vigorously, "Moreover, I have to state it in your papers." I pack my things, take my papers from the clerk's office, and go to the airfield. There is a mechanic working here who often repaired my regiment's airplanes. All I need is a little luck. It is at this point that the repaired airplane is rolled out of the repair shop. It happens that it has to be delivered to Karpovo, 15 kilometers from Stalingrad. I can't say that I feel recovered. My legs are braided, as if I were in a dream. Nevertheless, I attribute this not so much to the illness as to the fresh air. 2 hours later, I am standing at the airfield in Karpovo after a flight over Tatsinskaya Surovikino Kalek. The field is packed with planes, mostly Stukas of our regiment and a neighboring squadron. The place itself does not allow to camouflage the machines. It is in the open steppe. The field has a slight slope. After landing, I start looking for a signpost that might tell me where our airplanes are. Soon I locate the regimental headquarters. This structure, located in the center of the airfield, is a covered pit referred to in military reports as a bunker. I have to wait a while before I can report my arrival to the commander. He has just taken to the air with my friend Klaus for a short combat sortie. When he returns, I report my return. There is no way he expected to see me so soon. What a sight you have! Your eyes and everything around you is yellow like a quince. I have to come up with some excuse, and I shamelessly reply, I'm only here because they let me go as a convalescent. It works. The commander looks at the chief of staff and says, shaking his head, if he's fit to fly. I know more about jaundice than all the doctors put together. By the way, where are your medical papers? Delicate question. I was in urgent need of some paper at the airfield in Rostov, and I found my certificate in more favorable and appropriate use. I have to think fast and answer in the same tone of voice. It seems to me that the medical papers were sent by courier. In accordance with the promise I was given 10 days ago, I take command of my old squadron. We rarely fly combat sorties. Only once do we raid one Volga wharf near Astrakhan. Our main task is to attack targets within Stalingrad itself. The Soviets have turned the city into a fortress. My squadron commander gives me the latest news. The ground staff is the same. Everyone is here, from gunner Goetz to chief mechanic Pisarik. The flying staff is a different matter, primarily due to casualties, but all the new crews I trained have been assigned to the reserve squadron. The living and service quarters are underground. In a very short time I had a sense of home again. The next day we make a sortie over Stalingrad, approximately 2/3 of which is in German hands. It is true that the Russians occupy only 1/3, but they hold that part of the city with a truly religious fanaticism. Stalingrad bears the name of Stalin, and Stalin is a god to all these young Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, Tatars, Turkmens, and other Mongols. They cling with a death grip to every pile of stones. They hide behind every remnant of the wall. To their Stalin, they play the part of fire-breathing monsters guards, and when these monsters stumble, the accurate shots from the revolvers of the political commissars nail them to the ground they defend. These Asiatic disciples of total communism and the political commissars behind them are destined by fate to force Germany, and with it the whole world, to abandon the cozy belief that communism is simply a political credo on a par with many others. Instead, they must show us first, and then all other nations, that they are followers of the new creed. And Stalingrad must become the Bethlehem of our century. But it is the Bethlehem of war and hatred, of annihilation and destruction. This thought occupies our minds as we make sortie after sortie against the Red Fortress. The part of the city held by the Soviets is right on the west bank of the Volga, and every night the Russians are dragging across it everything their Red Guards need. Fierce fighting breaks out for city blocks, for every cellar, for every piece of factory wall. We must drop our bombs extremely carefully, because our own soldiers are only a few meters away, in another cellar or behind the rubble of a nearby wall. On our photographic maps of the city, every house is distinguishable. Each pilot's target is accurately marked with a red arrow. We fly with map in hand. We are forbidden to drop bombs before we have surely identified the target and determined the exact position of our troops. Flying over the western part of the city, far from the front line, one is surprised by the silence here and the almost normal traffic on the roads. Everyone, including civilians, goes about their business as if the city were far behind the front lines. The entire western part of the city is now in German hands. Only in the smaller eastern part, on the very bank of the Volga, there are still pockets of Russian resistance, and here there are fierce attacks. Often the Russian anti-aircraft guns are silenced by lunchtime, perhaps because they have already used up all the ammunition that was brought to them from across the river last night. On the other side of the Volga, Soviet fighters take off from several airfields and try to weaken our attacks on the Russian side of Stalingrad. They rarely pursue us over our positions and usually turn back as soon as their own troops are no longer below them. Our airfield is near the city, and when we fly in formation we have to make 1 or 2 circles to gain a certain altitude. That's enough for Soviet air reconnaissance to warn the anti-aircraft gunners. The way things are going, I don't like the thought of being away for even 1 hour. Too much is at stake. We feel it instinctively. This time I am on the verge of a physical breakdown, but if they decide I am sick, it will mean the loss of my unit, and this fear gives me renewed strength. After 2 weeks during which I feel more like I'm in Gades, the subterranean realm of shadows, than on Earth, I'm slowly regaining my strength. In between, we visit the sector north of the city, where the front line crosses the Don. Several times we attack targets near Bikidov. Here anti-aircraft guns are particularly strong fire. To fulfill the task is very difficult. According to the testimony of captured Russians, these anti-aircraft guns are operated exclusively by women. When we are going on day sorties to this sector, our crews always say, "We have a date with these anti-aircraft girls today." This in no way sounds disparaging, at least to those who have flown in this sector before and know how accurately they shoot. We regularly bomb bridges over the Don north of the city. The largest of these is near the village of Kletskaya, and this bridgehead on the west bank of the Don is particularly vigilant in defending the anti-aircraft guns. The prisoners tell us that here is the headquarters. Bridgehead is constantly expanding, and every day the Soviets move more men and equipment here. Our attacks on the bridges slow the arrival of these reinforcements, but they are able to recover them quickly with pontoons, so that soon the river crossing is resumed. Here, on the Don, the front line is held mainly by Romanian units. The German 6th Army is fighting in Stalingrad itself. One morning, after receiving an urgent message, our regiment takes off and heads towards the bridgehead at Kletskaya. The weather is bad. Low clouds, it is snowing. The air temperature is about 20 degrees below zero. We are flying at low altitude. But what are these units coming towards us? We're not even halfway there yet. Masses of people in brown uniforms. Are they Russians? No, Romanians. Some of them are even dropping their rifles to run faster. What a shameful sight. We prepare for the worst. We fly over a column of fleeing men to the north, then over artillery positions. The guns are abandoned, but not out of action. There are shells lying around. We fly some more distance and see Soviet troops. They discover that the Romanian positions in front of them are not defended by anyone. We drop bombs, fire cannons, and machine guns, but what good is it if there is no resistance on the ground? We are seized with blind rage. In our heads we have terrible premonitions. How can we prevent this catastrophe? I am firing machine guns into these boundless yellow-green waves of approaching troops, which have rushed at us from Asia and Mongolia. I have no more ammunition left, not even enough to defend myself in case of fighter attacks. Now I must get back, refuel, and replenish ammunition. Against these hordes our attacks are like a drop in the ocean, but I am not inclined to think about it now. On the way back, we see the Romanians running again. They are lucky that I am out of ammunition and have nothing to stop their cowardly running. They have abandoned everything. Their easily defended positions, heavy artillery, ammunition stores. Their cowardice will surely end in disaster for the entire front. Meeting no resistance, the Soviet offensive is rolling on to Kalak. If they capture Kalak, they will be able to close the ring around the part of Stalingrad they have captured. Within the city, our 6th Army is holding its ground. Under a hail of concentrated artillery fire, it reflects the attacking waves of the Reds, surging towards us wave after wave. The 6th Army is literally bleeding. It fights with its back pressed against the crumbling wall and continues to strike back. South of Stalingrad, the front runs along a chain of lakes stretching from north to south and then continues into the steppe. In this ocean of plains, there is not a single island for hundreds of kilometers up to the small Ilista. The German motorized infantry division occupying the city controls these mighty steppe spaces. Our allies also hold the gap between this division and the 6th Army at Stalingrad. The Red Army suspects that our front is weakened here, especially in the northern part of the Lake District, and the Soviets decide to break through here in a westerly direction. They're trying to reach the Don. A couple more days and the Russians reach the river. The Reds' breakthrough forms a gap in our lines, and they try to reach the town of Cauldron. This means a death sentence for the Sixth Army. Two attacking groups of Russians join in Kulakh, and the ring around Stalingrad closes. Everything happens disconcertingly fast. Our reserves are stunned by the Russians and caught in their pincers like a trap. During this phase, one act of anonymous heroism succeeds another. No German unit surrenders until it fires its last bullet, throws its last grenade, and continues the fight to the bitter end. We fly over the Cauldron in all directions, wherever the most threatening situation develops. There is still Soviet pressure on the Sixth Army, but the German soldier holds firm. Wherever there is a threat of a breakthrough, it is immediately blocked and counterattacks drive the enemy back. Our comrades do the impossible to hold back this breakthrough. They hold their positions, already knowing that the paths to their retreat are cut off because of the cowardice and treachery that has come to the aid of the Red Army. Our airfield is often targeted by Soviet planes attacking from low and high altitudes, but compared to the effort they expend, the damage is very small. Only now we are so short of bombs, ammunition and fuel that it is becoming unwise to keep all squadrons within the Cauldron. All planes leave in several runs, and after our departure, air support from this airfield will no longer be. A special group under Cauldron remains in the Cauldron to provide support to the fiercely attacked Sixth Army as long as it is still able to take to the air. All other personnel fly from the Cauldron to Oblivska, 150 kilometers west of Stalingrad. A fairly strong German force is coming to attack from the direction of Salsk, in conjunction with two armored divisions that have just arrived and have been withdrawn from the front. We know that these are well-rested elite units. The attack begins in a northeastern direction, with the aim of restoring the interrupted communication with Stalingrad and thus recovering the Sixth Army from encirclement. We support this operation by flying from sunrise to dark. It must succeed. The encircled divisions must be released. The offensive develops successfully. Soon our comrades capture Abganirovo, some 30 kilometers south of the Cauldron. In heavy fighting, they have marched more than 60 kilometers. Despite the increasing resistance, we continue to advance. If now the Sixth Army could put pressure from within on the southern wall of the Cauldron, the operation could be accelerated and simplified, but it would hardly be able to do so even if the order was given. The Sixth Army is physically exhausted. Only iron determination compelled it to continue its resistance. The disintegration of the encircled army was further exacerbated by the lack of the most basic necessities. They now found themselves without food, ammunition, and fuel. Temperatures are usually between 20 and 30 degrees below zero. The chance of breaking out of the ring depended on the successful delivery of a minimum amount of supplies to the Cauldron. But the weather god is clearly on the enemy side. A prolonged period of bad weather prevents us from delivering supplies. In previous battles in Russia, operations to unlock the boilers have always been successful. But this time only a small fraction of the irreplaceable supplies can reach their target. Later, landing difficulties arise, and we are forced to rely on dropping supplies using parachutes, some of which are lost. In spite of this, we deliver the supplies in a blizzard, and under these conditions, some of the valuable cargo gets to the Russians. Another misfortune comes with the news that the Soviets have made a gigantic breach in the section of the front south of us, held by our allies. If this breakthrough is not prevented, it could spell disaster for the entire southern front. There are no resources available. The breakthrough must be stopped. Strike group intending to break through to Stalingrad from the south. The only available. The most capable units are taken from it and sent to the danger zone. We fly daily over the German attacking troops and know the strength of enemy resistance. We also know that these German divisions could reach the Cauldron and relieve those encircled there. Since the offensive potential is weakened, it's over. It is too late to recover from the encirclement of the Sixth Army. Its tragic fate is inevitable. The decision to stop the offensive on Stalingrad must be a brutal blow. The weak remnants of this force will not be able to do it on their own. In two crucial places, our allies succumbed to Soviet pressure. Through no fault of the German soldier died the Sixth Army. and with it, Stalingrad. And with Stalingrad, the likelihood of the destruction of the Red Army's strike force. John Clausen had just used up the available supply of bombs and fuel and returned to the regiment. He had done an excellent job under difficult circumstances, but even here at Oblivska, the conditions in which he found us could be called anything but quiet. One morning gunfire was heard on the far side of the airfield. As it is later discovered, ground personnel from another unit have engaged regular Soviet units. The meteorologists sound the alarm by blowing red rockets into the air. I immediately take off with the squadron, and near the airfield I see horses and riders dismounting. They are Ivan's. To the north is an incalculable number of horses, men, and military equipment. It doesn't take long to realize. A Russian cavalry division is advancing, and there is no one to stop it. There is still no solid front to the north of us, so the Soviets have slipped unnoticed through the newly opened gap. Their main forces are 4 or 5 kilometers from our airfield, and their forward units have already come in close. There are no ground troops in the area, so the situation is extremely dangerous. The first thing we have to do is to destroy their artillery with bombs and cannon fire before they can get into position. Then we will attack the rest. Hasty cavalrymen move slowly and lose their effectiveness. We therefore have no choice but to shoot all the horses. We take off and land without interruption. We're in a feverish hurry. If we don't wipe them out before sunset, our airfield will be in danger of a night attack. In the afternoon we see several Soviet tanks. They're coming at full speed towards the airfield. We must destroy them, otherwise all is lost. We drop bombs on them. They maneuver to avoid them. The need to protect ourselves gives us a precision we've never had before. After the attack, we gain altitude and return to the airfield by the shortest route possible, satisfied with the job we have done and the success of our defensive measures. Suddenly, right in front of me, I see, to the right, at the edge of the airfield. It's unbelievable. The last Soviet tank has escaped the turmoil caused by our bombardment and intends to fulfill its mission. It alone can shoot and burn all the airplanes on the ground. I dive, and a well-aimed bomb hits the target and destroys the tank a few meters from the runway. In the evening, I make my 17th sortie of the day, and we look carefully at the battlefield. It is quiet. Everything has been wiped out. Tonight we can sleep without worrying about anything. During the last sorties, our anti-aircraft guns left their positions and formed a sort of protective screen at the edge of the airfield in case any surviving Ivans get the idea to run the wrong way at night. I personally think that's unlikely. The few survivors will rather report to some headquarters that their cavalry division will not return and must be decommissioned. Shortly before Christmas, we are standing at Morozovskaya, a little farther west. Here, almost the same thing happens to us. Ivan is hiding a few kilometers from the airfield, in Uripinsk. The weather is interfering with flying. We don't want Ivan to attack us at night when we can't retaliate with airstrikes. On December 24, we have to fly to another airfield to the southeast anyway. Continued bad weather forces us to turn back during the flight and spend Christmas at Morozovskaya. On Christmas night, we all know that our guards can raise the alarm at any moment. In this case, we will have to protect the airfield and the airplanes. No one feels completely safe. Some are better at hiding their feelings, some are worse. Although we sing Christmas songs, there is no real holiday atmosphere. The next day, we learn that on Christmas night the Soviets have captured the neighboring airfield at Tatsinskaya, 50 kilometers to the west, where our transport squadron is located. The Soviets show unprecedented cruelty. The bodies of some of our comrades are horribly mutilated, with eyes gouged out and ears and noses cut off. We are now seeing the Stalingrad catastrophe in full. During Christmas week, we attack Soviet forces north of Tatsinskaya and near our airfield. Gradually, combat-ready Luftwaffe units are pulled up from the rear and fresh ground units are formed from reservists to cover our airfields. Optimists may call it a front, but these units can't really fight until they are backed up by proven regular troops capable of turning the tide, for which they can't be blamed. There are many difficulties ahead, and improvisation is needed. Due to the new situation, we are no longer able to support the front on the Chur River in the area of Nishinchurskaya and Surovikino. This front is the first barrier just created, stretching in an east-west direction against an enemy attacking from the north. The terrain here is perfectly flat, and there are no natural obstacles. All around, as far as the eye can see, the steppe stretches out. The only shelter is the so-called gullies or ravines, the bottom of which is 10 meters lower than the surrounding plain. They are relatively wide and can shelter vehicles, but only if they are stacked one behind the other. All this steppe country stretches for hundreds of kilometers from Rostov to Stalingrad. If the enemy could not be covered on the march, he can always be found in such hidden places. In clear cold weather in the morning there is often a fog. It does not dissipate until we take to the air. During one of the flights to the Chera front, we had just laid down on the return course when the fog suddenly thickened. I immediately landed with the whole squadron in a large field. Our troops are not to be seen here. Henschel goes off with a few flight gunners to reconnoiter. 3 hours later they return. They could only find us by shouting at the top of their voices. I can barely see my outstretched arm. Shortly before noon, the fog lifts a little, and soon we land successfully at our airfield. January passes quickly, and before we relocate to Shakhty, we temporarily set up our headquarters in Tatsinskaya. We fly out from here mainly against those enemy forces that threaten the Donets area. For combat sorties farther north, my squadron uses the airfield at Voroshilovgrad. From here, it is not far to the Donets. It is easier to fight against possible enemy attempts to organize a crossing. Because of the incessant sorties and heavy fighting since Stalingrad, the number of planes we are able to get in the air in a day is dropping sharply. In the whole squadron there are enough airplanes to form one strong group. Flying simultaneously against several targets rarely yields results, and we fly one group, the leadership of which is usually entrusted to me. The whole Donets area is full of industrial sites, mostly mines. Once the Soviets manage to gain a foothold here, they are almost impossible to dislodge. Here they can find good hiding places and camouflage. Low-altitude attacks among the pipes and slag heaps usually have only limited success. Pilots have to pay too much attention to various obstacles and cannot concentrate on their mission. On one of these days, Neerman and Kufner celebrate their birthday. Northwest of Kamensk, we look out for the enemy, especially tanks, and individual airplanes separate from the formation. IL-5 lands on the tail of Kufner and Neerman's plane. I warn them of the danger, but Neerman interjects. Where? He doesn't see the enemy fighter because it came in behind him. Now he's already firing at close range. I immediately turn back, though without much hope of making it in time. In a split second I hit him before he realizes what's happening. After that, Neerman no longer claims to always be able to spot any fighter. This kind of birthday celebration is usually a lot of fun, and often someone gets pranked. Such is the case this time. Our medic is sitting with us. Our pilots say that he can't stand the rumble of gunfire. Early in the morning, Jung Clausen goes to the phone and gets the medic right out of bed. Jung Clausen poses as the chief of the medical corps. Get ready immediately. Fly to the Cauldron. I'm sorry, did you not hear me? Pack up immediately. Fly to the Stalingrad Cauldron. I don't understand. The doctor lives a floor below, and we wonder why he doesn't hear Jung Clausen's loud voice coming from the room upstairs. He must be too excited. You know my heart is sick. That's not negotiable. I order you to go to the Cauldron immediately. But I've just been operated on. Can't you send someone else? Are you serious? I can't believe you're refusing to follow that order. What kind of a crappy situation are we in if we can't even count on you? We roll with laughter. The next day, the doctor runs around in circles, but swears to anyone who will listen to him that he too may have to carry out this extremely dangerous assignment. A few days later, he is carded and files a report for transfer to another unit. Better for him, better for us. These days we use the airfield in Rovinki for a short time, and then move to Gorlovka, near Stalino, the industrial center of Donbass. Heavy snowstorms interfere with sorties. Getting the squadron in the air always takes a long time. Schwerblatt is sent to us as a replacement, and he makes his first combat sortie with me in the Artemovsk area. I take off a little earlier, because he has visible problems with the run-up in the snow. Then, after he takes off, instead of staying close to me, he follows me at a great distance. Several La-5s are frolicking around him, using his plane for marksmanship practice. It's a miracle he hasn't been shot down yet. He's flying in a straight line, not trying to dodge. Obviously thinks that's the way it's supposed to be. I have to turn and follow him, after which the fighters disappear. After landing, he discovers bullet holes in the fuselage and in the tail. He says to me, "I got hit by anti-aircraft guns. Must have been anti-aircraft, because I didn't see any fighters." I reply with a note of sarcasm. "I must warmly congratulate you on an excellent rear gunner, who must have been determined not to notice anything, not even the fact that the Laws were using him for marksmanship practice." Nevertheless, Schwerblatt later shows himself to be at his best. Everyone talks about him as my shadow. When we fly together, he hangs behind me like glued. Besides, he joins me in all my sporting endeavors with the same vigor, and he doesn't smoke or drink. It isn't long before he provides proof of his flying prowess. He almost always flies my wingman, and the two of us often go on a mission together. We don't get much rest because the Soviets are trying to break westward across the road connecting Konstantinovskaya and Kramatorsk in the direction of Slaviansk, north of us. During one of the attacks I make my 1000th combat sortie. My comrades congratulate me and organize for me a chimney sweep and a piglet, for good luck. Despite my stubbornness, the 1001st sortie turns out to be my last for the next few months. I get a new assignment. I have to go home for a vacation, but I decide to fly to Berlin first to find out where they are going to send me. A special assignment awaits me, and so I have to arrive at the department of the Ministry of Aviation. As I learn, the only reason for the new assignment is my high number of combat missions, but no one in Berlin knows anything. In that case, I can return to the front immediately. Most likely my superiors just made a mistake. Nevertheless, in the ministry and departments, the possibility of a mistake is denied in principle. After long telephone conversations, I am ordered to follow, at the end of my leave, to Rechlin, where experiments are being conducted on the use of anti-tank weapons from airplanes. These experiments are being conducted under the direction of Captain Stepp, an old acquaintance of mine. Then I will have to fly to Bryansk in order to test the theory by practice. This is encouraging, but still, testing new weapons is not participation in combat operations. I'm being congratulated on my promotion to captain. I spend the next 4 days skiing in Street Anton. Large ski competitions are held here. As an active participant and senior officer, I become captain of the Luftwaffe team. This team also includes such aces as Genevieve, Pfeiffer, Gable, and Schuler. We have a great time, and by the end of the 2 weeks my batteries are recharged again. I don't feel like going to Rechlin. It would be better to fly directly to Bryansk, where there is an experimental anti-tank air detachment, and preliminary tests are already underway. Here they are testing U-87s with a 75mm gun mounted under the pilot's seat, and the U-87s I flew are equipped with anti-aircraft 37mm guns under the wings. They fire projectiles with a tungsten core capable of penetrating armor of any thickness. These shells do not explode until they penetrate the armor through and through. The U-87, which is already not characterized by high speed, after the installation of these guns becomes even slower and heavier. Its maneuverability is drastically reduced, and landing speed increases significantly. But the benefits of using such armament outweigh the deterioration in flight performance. Experiments with the U-87 armed with a large caliber gun are soon abandoned because the problems discovered are too serious and leave no hope of success. The first combat sortie attempted by the U-87 is accompanied by casualties. The superiors are skeptical of the idea, but I am impressed by the possibility of hitting the target with an accuracy of 20 to 30 cm. Since such accuracy can be achieved, it means that the pilot will be able to hit easily vulnerable parts of the tank, if only he can get close enough. We learn to recognize the different types of Russian tanks without error, and learn where their most vulnerable parts are. The engine, fuel tanks, ammunition. Hitting a tank does not mean destroying it. It is necessary to hit a certain place, such as fuel or ammunition, with an incendiary or bursting shell. 2 weeks passed. Then the ministry wanted to know if we were ready for immediate departure to the Crimea. The Soviets are pushing on, and here we have a wider and better field for practical testing of our theories. On a stabilized front with strong air defenses, it is almost impossible to fly at low altitude and then open fire while a few meters above the ground. We know this because our losses outweigh the positives. We will only be able to use these weapons where the front and air defenses are in motion. Hauptmann Steppe remains in Bryansk and will join us later. Together with all airworthy aircraft, I fly via Konotop and Nikolaev to Kerch on the Crimean Peninsula. In Kerch, I meet my unit again. It is a pity that although I see the faces of old friends, I cannot fly with them. They are bombing the bridgehead at Krimskaya, for which there is heavy fighting. My friends tell me that the Soviet tanks that have broken through are already several kilometers from the old front line. This means, therefore, that we need to attack them, although they are still covered by the stationary and therefore powerful anti-aircraft defenses on the Russian front line. The anti-aircraft defenses are concentrated in a very limited area. After the fighting for the oil fields near the Caspian Sea was over, practically all of the enemy's anti-aircraft artillery was transferred from these areas and concentrated in our area. It was transferred to the front along the route Mozdok, Piatigorsk, Armavir, Krasnodar. On one of the first days after our arrival, we conducted the first test of anti-tank guns south of Krimskaya. The breaching tanks are 700 meters from their own positions. We immediately spot them and are eager to see what can be done here. It turns out there's very little. Flying over the front line, I take a direct hit from an anti-aircraft shell. The other planes are no better off. In addition to all this, enemy fighters appear on the scene, Spitfires of the old series. This is the first time I meet with this type of airplanes in Russia. One of our young pilots is hit and makes an emergency landing right in a vineyard. In the evening of the same day, he returns home with his arms full of fruit and an upset stomach. After such a start, and the modest results of our first trial, things are not looking too rosy. We get condolences wherever we show up, and even those who are sympathetic to us think we don't have long to live. The heavier the flak fire, the faster the tactics are developed. It becomes obvious that we must always have bombs in order to suppress enemy defenses. But airplanes with anti-tank guns cannot also carry bombs because they become too heavy. Also, a U-87 equipped with cannons cannot dive because the load on the wings becomes too great. The practical solution, therefore, is to have an escort of conventional Stukas. The new Soviet offensive gives us an opportunity to test these ideas in practice. Northeast of Temryuk, the Soviets are about to attack the front on the Kuban. They begin to move parts of 2 divisions across the bays in the hope that this maneuver will lead to the collapse of the Kuban front. We only have isolated strongholds with a very unreliable supply line that hold the plains northeast of Temryuk. Naturally, their striking power is limited, and there is no way they will be able to match this new Soviet operation. Our intelligence confirms the presence of a large number of boats in Yisky Bay and near Akhtarsk. They are being attacked by our Stukas, but the targets are so small and the boats so numerous that these attacks alone cannot force the Russians to abandon their plan. They scurry about the bays both day and night. The total distance they have to cover one way is about 45 kilometers. The lakes are connected by narrow channels, and the Russians approach Temryuk closer and closer, landing deep in the rear of our Kuban front. At times they pause for a breather under cover of reed thickets. When they are in hiding, it is very difficult to detect and recognize them. But if they wish to resume their progress, they must once again navigate the open water. We are in the air all day, from sunset until dark, scouring the water and reed beds in search of boats. The Ivans use the most primitive craft, boats with motors being rare. In addition to rifles, they carry hand grenades and machine guns. In the small boats, there are usually from 5 to 7 men. In the larger boats, up to 20. In attacks on these boats, we do not use our special anti-tank weapons because their high destructive power is simply not needed here. On the other hand, the weapons must be capable of smashing the wooden hulls of the boats, so they can be done away with most quickly. Ordinary anti-aircraft shells with suitable fuses prove to be the most practical. Anything that tries to slip through the water is doomed. Ivan's losses in the boats must be serious. I alone destroy 70 boats in only a few days. Gradually, their defenses are getting stronger, but that doesn't stop us. Captain Ruffer, an excellent gunner from a neighboring anti-tank squadron, flying a Heinkel 129, is shot down and lives for a while, like Robinson Crusoe, on an island in the middle of the bay. He gets lucky and is rescued by a platoon of German infantry. Soon the Soviets realize that they will have to abandon their plans, as they cannot succeed with such losses. About May 10, I receive word that the Führer has awarded me the Oak Leaves to the Knight's Cross, and I am to arrive in Berlin immediately to present them. The next morning, instead of my usual excursions over the Finns, I fly to Berlin in an Me 109. En route, I make company plans for my immediate return to the unit. At the Reich Chancellery, I learn from Lieutenant Colonel von Belov, adjutant of the Luftwaffe, that I am to receive the award along with 12 other soldiers. They all belong to different branches of the army and have different ranks. I tell von Belov that I am going to explain to the Führer that I am tired of being numbered in the second role in the experimental unit, and I ask him to reassign me to the position of commander of my old squadron in the Air Regiment Immelmann. Only on these terms will I accept the award. I say nothing about the steps I have taken in sending notes to the Air Ministry. Shortly before we report to the Führer, von Belov brings me the glad tidings that he has managed to agree on everything. I return to my old squadron on the condition that I continue to study the suitability of the experimental aircraft. I willingly agree, and only now the reward makes me truly happy. The Führer pins the medal on my chest. He talks to us for about an hour about the military situation, past, present, and future plans. All of us who have come from the front are amazed at his unerring judgment of the situation. He does not blame the German soldier at the front. He sees things just as we do, as if he has experienced them himself. He is full of ideas and plans, and absolutely confident. Time and again, he emphasizes that we must defeat Bolshevism, or the world will be plunged into a terrifying chaos from which it will never be able to escape. Hence, Bolshevism must be destroyed, even if even now the Western Allies refuse to realize how ruinous their own policies are to them and the rest of the world. He radiates an equanimity that is transmitted to us as well. We each go back refreshed, and in 2 days I return to my old unit based in Kerch and take command of my squadron. I have taken my gun-equipped airplanes with me, and am familiarizing the squadron with the new machines. As soon as I see an opportunity for the use of experimental aircraft, they fly out with mine. Later they form a separate anti-tank squadron, which operates independently, but in combat it remains under my command. We are followed by the rest of the airplanes left in Bryansk. Captain Stepp also returns to his unit. There is plenty of work for the Stuka bombers, because the Soviets have crossed the Black Sea and landed in the rear of our front. They have captured a bridgehead on the hilly coast east and southwest of Novorossiysk. We fly out frequently to attack it. Reinforcements and equipment continue to arrive at the enemy on landing barges. Anti-aircraft defenses are rampant with the same vigor as over other critical points on the Cuban bridgehead. Many of my comrades make their last flight here. My commander ejects with a parachute over the bridgehead. He gets lucky, and the wind carries him behind our trenches. We fly back and forth between the bridgehead and Krimskaya. Usually I, with my planes, dive almost to ground level and then leave at low altitude over the sea or over the flats farther north where the defenses are weaker. The low altitude from which the bombs are dropped improves the accuracy of the bombing. And besides, the defenses have not yet adapted to our low-altitude tactics. If the anti-aircraft guns open fire as we approach Krimskaya, flying over a plain with tobacco plantings, many new crews become overly verbose, but quickly calm down when they hear the old guys laughing over the radio at some joke or verse from a song. Someone shouts, "Maximilian is out of it again." This refers to the commander of the 2nd Squadron. He has a habit of circling for long periods of time in the bursts of anti-aircraft shells, always slow to dive, so that the planes flying behind him lose their bearings. Self-confidence and coolness are soon passed on to newcomers. I often do a loop, barrel roll, or some other trick, and then wonder what the anti-aircraft gunners think at that moment, probably thinking that I wanted to have fun and play some kind of game with them. The weather does not prevent combat sorties. It's almost always bright blue skies and sunny. When there are no sorties, we go for a swim in the sea. In the Azov Sea or the Black Sea, there are a lot of great beaches in these places. If Schwerblatt and I want to dive, we go to Kerch Harbor, where there are harbor cranes and piers of sufficient height. The airfield at Kerch is packed with planes, and we move to Kerch Bagdarovo, 10 kilometers to the west, camping in a kolkhoz. There is plenty of wood here, and we soon build ourselves a barrack for a mess hall. Fuel is scarce at the moment, and we fly only if absolutely necessary. Thus, we have a lot of free time these weeks, which everyone spends as they wish. Schwerblatt and I run 10 kilometers almost every day, and soon we are well acquainted with the whole area, not only from the air. Every night we are visited by Soviet P-2s and old DB-3s. They bomb mainly the railway station, the harbor, and the airfield at Kerch IV. Here we have anti-aircraft guns, and also from time to time, a few night fighters fly out to hunt. We usually see the Russians flying back and forth, almost every time someone goes down in flames. Our opponents are not very skillful at night fighting. Obviously, they need more practice. Sometimes they just get lucky. One day a bomb hits an ammunition train standing on the sidings, and for hours the flashes light up the night sky with a ghostly glow, the ground shaking with explosions. Pretty soon these raids become part of our normal routine. We stay in our beds and sleep. Otherwise, lack of sleep will affect our raids the next day, and that could lead to disaster. It is the last days of June, and our time in the Crimea is coming to an end. Minister Speer is in Kerch in connection with an extensive construction project and pays us a visit on the way back. At the same time, our unit is visited by a Japanese delegation. At the same time, Colonel Kupfer, commander of the Immelmann, celebrates his birthday, a significant cause for celebration. The beautiful garden at the regiment's summer headquarters is alive with cheerful music, but the army band is a bit of a faux pas. They play in succession all the things that are not required of them. Everyone has his own choice. At hours like this, everyone forgets that home is so far away, and the war goes on. We are all transported in time and space to an invisible world of beauty and peace in which there is no Crimea, no bridgehead, no bombs, and suffering. Such hours of rest and reverie warm our souls. By early July, the pressure of the Soviets eases and the German front stabilizes. It passes between Krimskaya and Moldavanski, having moved back quite a bit. We never manage to get started on the heating in our barracks, and on July 4 we receive an urgent order to move. No one knows exactly where we are going. Today we are to fly to Melitopol. Here we will receive our orders for tomorrow. We are flying north over the blue waters. Melitopol is a transportation hub far behind the front lines. The airfield is occupied by bomber units equipped with Heinkel 111s. Our colleagues inform us that today a German ballet troupe, consisting of 10 lovely girls from 18 to 20 years of age, gives a single performance. In a flash, all the planes are stowed and ready for tomorrow's departure. Cupid equips everyone with wings. The sight of pretty German girls after so long an interval cannot fail to cheer the heart of every soldier on the Eastern Front, old and young. Our hardened merrymaker, Lieutenant Jekyll, plucks all the flowers before entering the theater, hoping to offer them to the girls as bouquets. In trying to uphold the honor of their regiments, the army is not about to relent, and we are all engaged in a fierce competition with them. I am not quite sure whether we will succumb to female charm or whether, after a few years spent in Russia, any girls will seem more or less attractive to us. Schwerblatt is also in doubt. Finally, he says that it would be better if we went for our usual 10-kilometer jog, and then we could avoid all these doubts. In the morning, the engines hum their familiar song again. We now know our destination, Kharkiv. We land at an airfield north of the city and camp nearby. The city itself makes a good impression and is without a doubt one of the sights of Soviet Russia, of which there are few. The high-rise house on Red Square is a typical example of Soviet architecture and, although damaged, is still an object of Ivan's pride. The rest of the beautiful buildings date back to the time of Tsarist Russia. The city has parks, an extensive network of boulevards, a theater, and many cinemas. The next morning, as soon as dawn breaks, we take off and head in the direction of Belgorod, our operational area for the next few weeks. On the ground, we meet old acquaintances from the Eastern Front, the shock divisions for whose support we are glad to be flying. We know that we will soon be on the offensive and have no unpleasant surprises. In addition to the armored divisions, the SS Deadhead and Greater Germany divisions are at the front. The purpose of this offensive is to strike northward toward Kursk, which is occupied by large Soviet forces. We should strike diagonally into the base of the Kursk Bulge, which extends westward to Konotop and is bordered on the south by the Belgorod area, and on the north by open terrain south of Orel. Ideally, it would be possible to reach the Orel-Belgorod line, but can the forces thrown on the offensive achieve this? We are in the air from dawn to dusk, ahead of our tank wedges, which soon pass 35 kilometers and reach the outskirts of Oboyan. Soviet defenses are strong, especially the air defense. On the first morning, approaching Belgorod, I see on my left and above me a formation of Heinkel 111s. Anti-aircraft guns open fire on them. One airplane explodes in the air and explodes into small pieces. It's a sight that would harden anyone. The sacrifices of our comrades must not be in vain. Later, we attack the positions of these anti-aircraft batteries. During low-altitude attacks, I often cast my eyes on the wreckage of the downed Heinkel, glistening in the sun. After lunch, one of the Luftwaffe officers comes up to me and tells me that my cousin was killed that day. I tell him that my brother must have been shot down this morning northwest of Belgorod while in a Heinkel 111. He wonders how I can know exactly how it happened. My cousin is the third person killed in our family. Later, his father, my uncle, also goes missing. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Over the next few weeks, our regiment takes some serious hits. My comrade in training school, Captain Vutka, commander of the 8th Link, is killed. Lieutenant Schmidt, whose brother was recently killed in an air battle over Sicily, is also killed. In the cases of Wutka and Schmidt, it is not entirely clear whether their planes exploded on entering a dive or at the moment the bomb ejector was pressed. Could some diversion have caused a short circuit that caused the explosion? The same thought comes to us when other similar incidents occur, but at that moment, in spite of the most careful investigation, we could find no definite evidence. During these sorties, a tremendous tank battle rages below us, a picture we have rarely had the opportunity to see since 1941. Masses of tanks tearing toward each other across the treeless plains. Enemy anti-tank guns are placed in the rear and camouflage. Sometimes the tanks themselves are buried in the ground, especially when they cannot move but still retain the ability to fire. Numerically, the Soviet tanks are much larger. Qualitatively, The superiority of our tanks and armament is immediately apparent to all. For the first time, our Tiger tanks are used in large numbers. All our tanks fire much faster, and their accuracy is higher. One reason for this is the better quality of our weapons, but the decisive factor is the more skillful use of them. The most dangerous thing for our tanks is the Soviet heavy and super heavy anti-tank guns, which are mounted at all key points on the battlefield. Since the Russians are masters of camouflage, spotting and neutralizing their anti-tank guns is very difficult. The sight of this mass of tanks reminds me of my airplane from the experimental air unit, armed with cannons, which I took with me from the Crimea. With so many enemy tanks below, one might try to test it again. True, the anti-aircraft defenses covering the Soviet tanks are very strong, but I tell myself that the two groups are 1 to 1.5 km apart, and as long as I do not get a direct hit from an anti-aircraft shell, you can always try to land a damaged plane behind our tanks. And so I fly in an airplane armed with anti-tank guns, and behind me, other Stukas with conventional bombs. The attempt is made. During the first attack, 4 tanks explode from a direct hit of shells from my guns. By evening, the total count comes to 12. We are all caught up in the passion of the pursuit, born of the great feeling that with each new tank destroyed will be saved a lot of German blood. After the first day, the mechanics have a lot to do, because almost all the planes are damaged by anti-aircraft fire. The life of such an airplane is not long, but the main thing is that the devil's spell is broken, and having this airplane, we have a weapon that can be quickly placed everywhere and can successfully fight the massive Soviet tanks. This discovery and its practical application is heartening to us all. In order to secure the arrival of these experimental airplanes, all crews are ordered to join us immediately. Thus, an anti-tank unit is formed. For operational purposes, it is under my command. The following days and battles complete the picture, and we are not left with success. While the anti-tank planes go on the attack, part of the bombers seek to suppress the ground defenses, the rest circling at low altitude like a hen over his chickens to protect the anti-tank planes from the attack of enemy fighters. Little by little, I discover all the necessary techniques. New skills are learned after someone gets hurt. We lose planes in poorly defended areas because we are flying at medium altitude in the middle of an artillery duel. We have to avoid the airspace along the trajectory of the shells. Otherwise, there is a danger that someone will be shot down accidentally. After a while, the Soviets managed to deal with our aerial anti-tank attacks quite successfully. If at all possible, they moved their anti-aircraft units along with the front tanks. The tanks are fitted with smoke shells to create an impenetrable screen or simulate fire in the hope that their pursuers will leave them alone, believing they have reached their objective. Experienced crews soon figure out this trick and never fall for the Russians again. In fact, a tank on fire burns very brightly. It is too risky to simulate such a flame. In many cases, the tank explodes as soon as the flames reach the ammunition. For us, it is extremely inconvenient if the explosion occurs unexpectedly and our plane is at a height of 10 to 15 meters above the tank. I have flown through the veil of flame twice in the last few days and thought, well, that's it this time. Nevertheless, I break through the wall of fire and emerge unscathed from the other side, even if the green camouflage paint on the skin of my plane is burnt and shrapnel from the exploded tank stains it with holes. Sometimes we dive at the steel monsters from behind, sometimes from the side. We choose a low angle of attack so we don't pass low over the ground and get in trouble. We always try to hit the tank in one of its most vulnerable spots. The front is always better armored, so every tank always tries to turn towards the enemy. The sides are armored weaker, but the best target is the stern. Here is located the engine, which must be cooled. The hull here is the thinnest. In order to facilitate cooling, there are holes in the armor. This is a good place to aim, because where the engine is, there is also fuel. When the engine is running, the tank is easily recognizable from the air by the bluish haze of the exhaust. On the sides of the tank are fuel tanks and shells, but here the armor is thicker than on the rear. Russian tanks often carry infantry. If we operate in sectors where we are well known, the infantrymen jump off the tanks on the move, even if they are moving at full speed. They think their time has come, and we're about to jump on them. Ivan prefers to meet the attack on solid ground.